In 1932, in a sharecropper's cabin outside Greenwood, Mississippi, a mother had 4 children, 1 skillet, and less than $1 to feed them for the week. She wasn't unusual. She was the norm. Across the rural South, Black families were living through a depression that had started for them years before the stock market ever crashed and would last long after it ended for everyone else. What she cooked that week is on this list. So is the wild plant families picked from ditches to survive the spring, and the scrap meat that became a Sunday tradition families are still proud of today. Here are 10 cheap meals that kept Black families alive through some of the hardest years in American history. Number 1, pot liquor and cornbread. When collard, mustard, or turnip greens simmered for hours in a pot with a scrap of fatback, the greens themselves weren't even the main event. The real prize was the pot liquor, the dark, mineral-rich broth left behind, thick with salt and nutrients. Families would ladle it into bowls and crumble cornbread right into the liquid, soaking it up like a soup. A neighbor with nothing else to offer might still show up at your door with a jar of pot liquor for a sick child. It wasn't scraps. It was medicine, and it was love. Number 2, hoe cakes. Long before pancakes were a breakfast staple, there were hoe cakes. Simple batter of cornmeal, water, and salt, fried on whatever hot surface was available. In sharecropper cabins, hoe cakes were cooked in a cast iron skillet, the edges crackling and browning in a spoonful of precious lard. A child heading out to the fields before sunrise might get nothing more than a hot hoe cake wrapped in cloth, meant to last until dinner. It cost almost nothing to make, and it kept a body moving through a full day of back-breaking work. Number 3, chitlins. When hog killing time came each fall, white landowners took the ham, the bacon, the choice cuts, and Black families were often left with what remained: the feet, the jowls, the intestines. What started as the parts nobody else wanted became, through skill and patience, a dish families were proud to serve. But in Black kitchens, this dish became a symbol of turning rejection into something worth gathering around. Number 4, poke salad. In early spring, before any garden vegetables were ready, families across the rural South went out to the fields and ditches to pick pokeweed, a wild plant that's actually toxic if you don't know how to prepare it. The leaves had to be boiled and drained, sometimes 2 or 3 times, to remove the poison before they were safe to eat, then fried up with a little bacon grease and maybe an egg scrambled in. Grandmothers passed the knowledge of exactly how long to boil it down to daughters and granddaughters, because getting it wrong could make you sick. Number 5, buttermilk and cornbread. On the leanest nights, dinner might be nothing more than a glass of cold buttermilk with a wedge of cornbread crumbled into it, eaten with a spoon like cereal. Buttermilk was the byproduct of churning butter, tangy and thick, and it cost far less than sweet milk. Some families let raw milk sour naturally on the counter into clabber, thickening it into something close to yogurt when refrigeration wasn't an option. It wasn't glamorous, but it was filling. It was cheap. And on a hot southern evening, it was cool and satisfying. Children who grew up on this meal remember it decades later. Not as poverty food, but as comfort food. Number 6, neck bones and rice. Another cheap, overlooked cut of meat could season an entire pot of rice for a family of 6 or more. The bones simmered for hours until the meat fell away and the broth turned rich and dark. Then everything was ladled over rice that had soaked up all that flavor. It was a formula repeated in kitchens across the South. Cheap bone, cheap starch, hours of patience, and a meal that tasted like it cost far more than it did. Number 7, fatback and biscuits. Fatback, the fatty strip cut from a hog's back, was one of the cheapest cuts a family could buy, and it did double duty in Depression-era kitchens. Sliced thin and fried until crisp, it became the meat of the meal. But the grease left behind in the skillet was just as valuable, saved in a can by the stove and used to fry the next day's eggs, greens, or cornbread. A little fatback and a warm biscuit could turn a bare pantry into something that felt, for a moment, like enough. Number 8, fried green tomatoes. Late in the growing season, before frost hit, gardens were often full of tomatoes that hadn't had time to ripen. Rather than let them go to waste, cooks sliced the firm green tomatoes, coated them in cornmeal, and fried them in hot grease until the outside turned golden and crisp, while the inside stayed tart and soft. Nothing that grew in the yard was allowed to go to waste. Not the greens, not the roots, and certainly not a tomato that simply ran out of time to turn red. Number 9. Hoppin' John. A pot of black-eyed peas cooked with rice and a bit of pork became more than just dinner. In many black Southern households, it was a New Year's tradition believed to bring good luck and prosperity for the coming year. The peas were said to hop in the pot as they boiled, which is where some believe the dish got its name. It was cheap, filling, and endlessly stretchable, made with dried peas that stored well through the winter months when fresh vegetables were scarce. Families with almost nothing left in the pantry by December could still usually scrape together a pot of Hoppin' John, turning the last hard weeks of the year into a meal filled with hope instead of just hunger. Number 10. Molasses tea cakes. Sugar was expensive, but molasses was cheap, and a batch of tea cakes made from molasses, flour, lard, and a little ginger could turn almost nothing into a dessert children begged for. There was no frosting, no candy, no store-bought treats most weeks. But a warm tea cake straight from the oven, eaten standing in the kitchen, was still a treat worth remembering for decades. It wasn't just dessert. It was proof that even in the leanest years, families found a way to make something sweet. Because in the end, this was never really about the food. It was about turning almost nothing into a full table, and love into something you could taste.